Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
Walk into your own bedroom right now and look at it like a stranger would. It isn't a bedroom. It's a quiet museum. A museum of things you swore would change your life. Exhibit 1 on the shelf above your bed, a half-read copy of Atomic Habits. The spine is barely cracked. You remember exactly where you stopped. Page 40-something, right when the excitement of new book smell wore off and the actual work of reading it began. Now it holds up a candle. Exhibit 2, folded in the corner of your closet. A set of resistance bands, still in the packaging clip. You wore them for 4 days straight in January. On day 5, you were just a little sore. By day 9, you'd forgotten they existed. And Exhibit 3, glowing quietly in your phone right now. A language app, maybe Spanish, maybe Mandarin, sending you a little red notification bubble that says, in its cheerful, guilt-tripping way, your streak is waiting. It's been waiting for 4 months. Every time your eyes land on one of these things, something in your chest tightens. Not because of the money you spent, because of what it seems to prove. That you start things and you don't finish them. That somewhere out there, other people are climbing steadily toward their goals like they're on a marked trail, and you're the person who keeps wandering off the path to look at a bird. Somebody, at some point, probably gave this a name to your face. Jack of all trades, master of none. You smiled when they said it. But quietly, in the space where nobody can hear you, you started to wonder, is something wrong with the way my brain is built? Here is the truth, and I want you to actually let it land before you keep scrolling. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not lazy. You are not weak-willed. In fact, the exact trait that makes you abandon things so easily is the raw, unrefined material of something rare. A mind built to master many things at once, not one. The difference between you and someone who finishes what they start isn't personality. It's a strategy you were never taught. And it starts with understanding a glitch running quietly in the background of your brain. One that's been sabotaging you since long before you knew it existed. The glitch. Your brain is, at its core, addicted to one specific feeling. The feeling of confusion disappearing. Neuroscientists sometimes call this the drive for coherence. Every time a knot in your understanding suddenly untangles, your brain floods you with a small hit of dopamine. That flood is not a metaphor. It's chemistry, and it feels genuinely wonderful. But here's where it gets complicated for people like you. Some brains are unusually sensitive to something researchers call reward prediction error, the gap between how much reward you expected and how much you actually got. Picture this. You decide, on a whim, to pick up watercolor painting. Day 1, you sit down with a cheap starter set and just start mixing colors. It feels like magic. You learn what happens when you drop clean water onto wet pigment. You learn the words wet on wet and negative space, and you say them out loud like you've just been led into a secret club. Every few minutes, you gasp. Oh, that's so cool. At this stage, your brain is basically a slot machine paying out on almost every pull. Researchers call this the novice high. You feel talented. You start quietly imagining your paintings hanging in a gallery somewhere. It feels like the beginning of a love affair, because chemically, it kind of is. Then, without warning, the machine stops paying out. You've absorbed the basics. You understand what the brush does. The aha moments that used to arrive every 5 minutes now arrive every 5 days, if you're lucky. This is the plateau. And it is where almost everyone's story quietly ends. Because here's the harsh part nobody puts in the beginner's guide. To go from knows the basics to genuinely good, you don't need more magic. You need hours of unglamorous repetition. You need to paint the same boring bowl of fruit 40 times until your hand finally understands what your eye already sees. For an average brain, this stretch is uncomfortable, but survivable. For a brain like yours, one that's used to running hot on dopamine, the faucet doesn't just slow down. It shuts off completely. And your brain, ever the ruthless accountant, starts running the numbers. I now have to work 10 times harder for 1% more understanding. That is a terrible trade. Abort. Go find something that feels good again. So you quit. Not because you're lazy, Because you are, quite literally, in withdrawal. Here's the part that will either comfort you or terrify you, depending on how you look at it. This dip happens to everyone. Every single person who has ever learned anything hits this exact wall. So why do some people push straight through it, and others? People like you bounce off it every single time? The answer is a psychological skill called distress tolerance. And here's the twist that most people never hear. The smarter and quicker you are, the weaker this particular muscle tends to be. Think back to school. Were you the kid who barely opened the textbook and still somehow pulled a good grade? Who understood the lesson while everyone else was still asking the teacher to repeat it? If that's you, I need you to hear this clearly. You are at genuinely high risk of what we're going to call the mastery trap. Because things came easily for so long, your nervous system never had to build tolerance for the feeling of being slow, confused, or bad at something. You became fluent in fluency, and you never built the callus that lets other people sit in the mud of not good yet without flinching. Think of emotional resilience the way immunologists think of the immune system. Children raised in environments that are too sterile often develop more allergies, not fewer. Their immune system never learned what to tolerate. In the same way, a mind that rarely struggles often develops a kind of emotional allergy to struggle itself. When the initial spark fades and the work becomes repetitive, running the same scale on a keyboard for the 200th time, debugging the same stubborn line of code, rewriting the same paragraph until it finally sounds right. This is the exact moment distress tolerance is supposed to step in and carry you. But for a brain unused to friction, that repetition doesn't just feel boring. It registers in the brain, almost like physical pain. And what you call getting bored and moving on to something new is, underneath the surface, an escape response. We've dressed this pattern up in flattering language. We call it being multi-passionate. We call it staying open to opportunity. But if you're honest with yourself for one uncomfortable moment, are you actually moving towards something, or are you fleeing the discomfort of depth the second it shows up? Here is the sentence I want you to sit with. You may have the intelligence of an adult, but in this one specific area, the emotional patience of a toddler being told to wait 5 more minutes for a snack, the 10-minute rule. So how do you actually build the muscle you skipped? You treat distress tolerance exactly like any other muscle, with resistance, applied on purpose, in small doses. And the single number that governs almost every version of this training is 10 minutes. Think about strength training for a second. Muscle doesn't grow during the easy first few reps. It grows on the final rep. The one where your arms are trembling and every cell in your body is begging you to rack the weight. Your mind builds the exact same way. The next time you're deep in a task, writing, coding, practicing an instrument, and boredom hits like a wall, and some part of your brain starts whispering, check your phone, just for a second, you deserve a break. I want you to recognize that whisper for exactly what it is. That is your final rep. In that exact moment, make a deal with your own brain. You can rest, but not yet. 10 more minutes first. Then set a visible countdown timer. During those 10 minutes, your job is not to produce brilliant work. Your only job is to stay in the chair. You're allowed to stare blankly at the screen. You're allowed to write something clumsy and wrong. What you are not allowed to do is switch tabs, pick up your phone, or leave the task. Why 10 minutes specifically? Because behavioral research on cravings shows that an urge, any urge, tends to peak and then naturally fade within roughly 10 minutes if you simply don't act on it. If you can sit through that window, the discomfort genuinely dissolves on its own. And every time you do this, you are quietly rewiring a pathway in your brain, teaching it a new lesson it desperately needs to learn. Discomfort is not an emergency exit sign. It is the doorway mastery walks through. But willpower alone, gritting your teeth through 10 minutes of misery, isn't a sustainable long-term system. You need a second, gentler tool, one that works with your brain's fear response instead of fighting it head on, tricking the guard dog. Why do you procrastinate the second you set a goal like write a novel or become fluent in French? Because to your amygdala, the ancient alarm system sitting at the base of your brain, a goal that size doesn't register as exciting. It registers as a threat. Too big, too uncertain, too risky. And your amygdala's job, since long before humans built cities, has always been the same: fight or run. In the modern world, running usually looks like lying on the couch with your phone 6 inches from your face. This is mental inertia, and the resistance is always strongest at the starting line, before you've even taken the first step. To get past it, borrow a principle from Japanese manufacturing philosophy, Kaizen, specifically the idea of the almost insultingly small step. The rule is simple. Shrink the task until your fear can't even be bothered to notice it. Don't tell yourself, I'm going to practice piano for an hour today. Your brain will slam the door before you even sit down. Instead, tell yourself, I'm going to play exactly 4 notes. That's the entire goal. 4 notes. Don't tell yourself, finish the chapter. Tell yourself, read exactly 1 paragraph. Here's why this quietly works so well. 4 notes is so laughably small that your amygdala doesn't sound the alarm at all. You slip past the guard dog before it even lifts its head. And here's the part that feels almost like a magic trick. Once your hands are already on the piano, you almost never stop at 4 notes. You end up playing for 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. Starting was always the entire war. Once you're in motion, your prefrontal cortex, the calm, logical part of your brain, quietly takes the wheel back from the panicked animal instinct that almost stopped you. Now apply this to the whole polymath mindset. If you're the kind of person drawn to painting, coding, and a new language all in the same season, don't try to grind through all 3 like a machine. Instead, scatter tiny pebbles every single day. 1 line of code, 1 rough sketch, 1 sentence in a new language. You turn what used to feel like an overwhelming obligation into a game you win every single day. And every small win releases just enough dopamine to keep the whole system running, the real difference between quitting and choosing. But here's a fair question, and I don't want to dodge it. If we keep bouncing between skills like this, aren't we just wasting years on things that never go anywhere? When is it actually the right moment to walk away? We've been fed a lie our entire lives. Winners never quit. That sentence is simply not true. The most accomplished people alive quit constantly. They quit failing projects. They quit draining relationships. They quit strategies that stopped working the moment they stopped working. The difference between them and someone who quits out of habit isn't whether they quit. It's when and why. Picture it as a hole in the ground. The moment you start something new, you drop into it. Author Seth Godin calls this the dip, the stretch where the initial thrill is gone, but the results haven't shown up yet either. You're working hard, and the scoreboard still reads 0. Most people quit at the very bottom of that hole for entirely emotional reasons. This feels pointless. This is too hard. I clearly don't have what it takes. But someone who genuinely understands how their own mind works doesn't quit at the bottom of the hole because of a feeling. They only quit once they've confirmed, with clear eyes, that the hole is actually a dead end. So how do you tell the difference between I'm quitting because it's hard and I'm quitting because this path is genuinely wrong? Here's the tool I want you to carry with you. The utility point. The rule is simple. Never quit on your worst day. Don't put down the guitar just because your fingertips are raw and stinging tonight. That's an emotional flare, not real information. Instead, give yourself permission to stop once you've reached roughly the top 80% of a skill's core fundamentals, enough that this skill can now genuinely support another goal you actually care about. Say you decide to learn photography. If your dream is to shoot wildlife for a major nature magazine, you are signing up for a brutal, decade-long apprenticeship, and there is no shortcut through it. But if you're a small business owner who just wants better photos for your product listings, then the moment you understand light, framing, and basic editing, you have already reached your utility point. You can put the camera down and move on. And that is not failure. That is precision. You harvested exactly what you came for without spending 5 extra years polishing a skill that was never your final destination. That is not the shallow restlessness of someone who can't commit. That is the cold, deliberate math of someone who knows exactly how their own time should be spent. You're not quitting. You're changing lanes on purpose. Why this was never a flaw. Have you ever quietly asked yourself, why do I keep collecting little pieces of so many different things? What is the actual point of any of this? The answer is 2 words: skill stacking. We were raised on an old idea: become the sharpest possible version of one single thing. Specialize. Be the undisputed expert in one narrow lane. But look at what's actually happening in the world right now. Artificial intelligence has arrived, and it is astonishingly good at doing one narrow thing extremely well. The people it threatens most are the specialists who only ever built one skill, no matter how sharp that one skill is. What AI still struggles to replicate is the person standing at the intersection of two unrelated worlds, the bridge builder. Consider someone like Dwayne Johnson. The world could have simply known him as a professional wrestler. Instead, he stacked performance, screen presence, and later, sharp business instincts, and built a media and beverage empire most single-lane actors never come close to. Or consider a novelist who also happens to genuinely understand market psychology. Not because a school forced them to, but because their restless curiosity refused to stay in one lane. That combination alone makes them rare in a room full of people who only write or only understand markets, but never both. This is the actual mechanism. If you only know how to write, you are one grain of sand among millions of writers. If you only understand finance, you're one grain of sand among millions of analysts. But the person who can write and think like an investor, or paint and code, or teach and build community, that combination is what becomes genuinely rare. Business thinker Scott Adams put it simply once: you don't need to be the single best at one thing. You need to become genuinely good, roughly top tier, at 2 or 3 different things, and then combine them in a way nobody else in the room can. That is your actual advantage. The thing you've spent years quietly hating about yourself, getting bored faster than everyone around you, was never a defect. It was an instinct, pointing you toward the missing pieces of a puzzle only you can see the shape of. You were never quitting. You were gathering materials. Every time you pick up a little bit of guitar, a little bit of code, a little bit of a new language, a little bit of psychology, you are quietly assembling a toolkit that no classroom ever taught and no algorithm can fully copy, because it lives at the exact intersection of everything you've ever been curious about. Your task was never to shrink yourself down to fit one narrow box. Your task is to stay curious and to keep noticing the connections most people walk right past without ever seeing. So hear this clearly, because I mean every word of it. The world may keep looking at your unfinished bookshelf and your abandoned hobbies and quietly shaking its head. People may keep calling you scattered or undisciplined or unable to commit. But from this moment forward, none of that has to define you, because you now understand what's actually happening underneath the surface. You were never broken. You were never lacking anything the finishers of the world have. Your mind simply runs on a different operating system, one built for breadth, for connection, for pattern, not for a single narrow lane. And that system was never the problem. It was always the gift, waiting for you to learn how to use it properly. If even one sentence in this video felt like it was describing you a little too accurately, I want you to do something for me right now, before you close this tab and go back to your day. Type the words, "I am reclaiming my peace," in the comments below. Not because it's a trend, but because naming it out loud is the first 10-minute rep of actually believing it. And if this message reached you at exactly the right moment, hit subscribe, because we go deeper into the psychology of the mind you didn't choose, but absolutely can learn to work with every single week. I am reclaiming my peace. See you in the next one.